The desert stretched endlessly before her, a barren expanse of cracked earth and jagged rocks, where the sun blazed with unrelenting fury. She stumbled forward, her breath ragged, her tattered skirt catching on thorny shrubs that clawed at her like desperate hands. Her name was Leela, though she hadn't spoken it aloud in weeks, not since she'd fled the settlement, driven by whispers of betrayal and a secret she carried like a curse. Her dark hair clung to her sweat-soaked face, and her eyes, once bright with hope, now darted nervously, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. The lonely Apache, they called him a shadow in the tales told by firelight, a man who roamed these wastes, neither friend nor foe, but something otherworldly, a specter of vengeance or salvation. She didn't know if he was real, but the weight of her desperation made her hope he was. Her fingers brushed the mark on her thigh, hidden beneath the frayed fabric of her skirt, a strange, crescent-shaped scar that burned when she thought of it, a brand from a past she couldn't escape. She'd heard the stories, the Apache could read marks like hers, could see the truth in them. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, the sand scorching her palms. "Just finish me," she whispered, her voice cracking, not to the sky but to the shadow she felt watching. The air grew heavy, and a faint rustle behind her made her heart lurch. She turned, and there he stood, a tall figure cloaked in dust and silence, his eyes dark and unreadable, like the night itself. He said nothing, but his presence was a weight, a question she wasn't ready to answer. Her skirt caught on a rock as she scrambled back, tearing slightly, exposing the mark. His gaze dropped to it, and for a moment, the world held its breath. The mark, a bee-shaped, intricate, pulsing with a life of its own, seemed to glow under his scrutiny. Leela's chest tightened. She didn't know if she feared him or needed him, but she knew he saw it, saw her, in a way no one else ever had. The wind howled, carrying the scent of sage and something older, something primal. He stepped closer, his boots silent on the sand, and she braced herself, unsure if she was meeting her end or her beginning. Leela's heart pounded as the lonely Apache knelt before her, his movements deliberate, like a predator deciding whether to strike. His face was weathered, etched with lines that spoke of years spent under this merciless sun, but his eyes held the depth that unnerved her, unknowing, as if he could see the threads of her life unraveling. She clutched at the worn edge of her skirt, trying to cover the mark, but his hand, calloused and steady, gently pulled the fabric aside, not roughly, not with malice, but with a purpose she couldn't fathom. The mark burned hotter now, a tingling heat that spread through her veins, and she gasped, her vision blurring. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the desert's hum. He didn't answer, only tilted his head, studying the mark as if it were a map to a forgotten place. Leela's mind raced, pulling her back to the night the mark appeared 3 years ago, in a fever dream where shadows whispered her name and a voice, cold as iron, told her she was chosen for what, she didn't know, but the mark had changed everything. It had driven her from her home, from the man she'd loved, from the life she'd known. The settlers called it a curse, said it tied her to something ancient, something they feared. Now, this stranger saw it, and his silence was louder than any accusation. He stood, his shadow falling over her, and pointed to the horizon, where storm clouds gathered, dark and heavy with promise. "You're running," he said at last, his voice low, like gravel underfoot. "But you can't outrun it." Leela's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his words rang true. She'd been running since that night, from the mark, from herself. He turned, beckoning her to follow, and though every instinct screamed to stay, to curl up and let the desert claim her, she rose. Her legs trembled, but she followed, drawn by the weight of his gaze, by the hope that he knew something she didn't. The mark pulsed, a rhythm like a heartbeat, and as they walked, the desert seemed to shift, the air growing cooler, the shadows longer. She didn't know where he was leading her, but for the first time in months, she felt something stir inside her, not fear, but purpose. The path they took wound through a canyon, its walls rising like ancient sentinels, carved with petroglyphs that seemed to writhe under fading light. Leela's bare feet ached, cut by sharp stones, but she pressed on, driven by the Apache's steady pace. He hadn't spoken since his first words, and his silence was both a comfort and a torment. She studied him as they walked at his broad shoulders, the way his long hair, streaked with gray, swayed like a pendulum. He carried no weapons, only a small leather pouch slung across his chest, yet he moved with the confidence of someone untouchable. Leela's mind churned with questions. Who was he? Why had he come to her? And why did the mark seem to call to him? She glanced down at it, the crescent now faintly glowing, a soft blue that pulsed in time with her steps. It hadn't done that before, not in all the years she'd carried it. The canyon opened into a small clearing, where a dry riverbed snaked through the earth, its banks littered with smooth stones that gleamed like bones. He stopped, kneeling to trace his fingers over one of the stones, and Leela saw a carving, identical to her mark, etched deep into the rock. Her breath caught, and she dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers trembling as she touched the stone. It was warm, alive, and the mark on her thigh flared in response. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. He looked at her then, his eyes softening, not with pity but with recognition. "It's older than you," he said. "Older than me. It's a promise, a debt." His words sent a chill through her, and she remembered the stories her grandmother told her, tales of spirits bound to the land, of marks that tied the living to the dead. She'd thought them fairy tales, but now, with the Apache's gaze on her, she wasn't sure. He stood, pointing to a narrow path leading deeper into the canyon. "You're not alone," he said, and though his voice was calm, it carried a weight that made her shiver. She followed, her mind racing, the mark's glow growing brighter, as if guiding her towards something she wasn't ready to face. Night fell as they reached a cave, its mouth yawning like a wound in the canyon wall. The Apache lit a small fire with flint and tinder from his pouch, the flames casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Leela sat across from him, her skirt pulled tight around her legs, the mark hidden but still burning. She wanted to ask about the stone, the mark, the promise he'd mentioned, but the words stuck in her throat. The firelight played across his face, revealing scars she hadn't noticed before, thin lines crisscrossing his jaw, like a map of battles fought and survived. He pulled a small bundle from his pouch, unwrapping it to reveal dried herbs and a piece of polished obsidian. He crushed the herbs, their sharp scent filling the air, and sprinkled them into the fire. The flames flared green, then blue, and Leela's mark pulsed in response, a sharp pain that made her gasp. "It knows you're here," he said, his eyes fixed on the fire. "It's been waiting." Leela's heart raced. "What's waiting?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. He didn't answer immediately, instead carving a symbol into the cave floor with the obsidian, a circle, bisected by a crescent, just like her mark. "You were chosen," he said finally, "but not by chance. The mark is a key, and this place is the lock." Leela's mind spun. She'd spent years hiding the mark, fearing it, but now it felt alive, a part of her that was waking up. The Apache leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The ones who came before, they left it for you, a debt to the land, to the spirits who guard it. You can't run from it, but you can face it." He handed her the obsidian, its surface cool and smooth, and she felt a jolt, like a current running through her. The cave seemed to hum, the air thick with something ancient, and Leela's fear mingled with the strange exhilaration. She didn't understand, not fully, but she knew she was on the edge of something vast, something that could swallow her whole or set her free. The Apache led her deeper into the cave, where the air grew damp and the walls glistened with moisture. The fire's light faded behind them, but the mark on Leela's thigh glowed brighter, casting a faint blue light that illuminated their path. She clutched the obsidian, its weight grounding her as the cave's walls seemed to pulse, alive with whispers she couldn't quite hear. The Apache moved with purpose, his steps sure despite the darkness, and Leela wondered how many times he'd walked this path, how many others he'd led here. The mark's heat was constant now, a steady rhythm that synced with her heartbeat, urging her forward. They reached a chamber where the air was thick with the scent of earth and something metallic, like blood. In the center stood a stone altar, its surface worn smooth by time, carved with symbols that matched the one on her thigh. Leela's breath hitched as she approached, the obsidian trembling in her hand. The Apache stood back, his expression unreadable, but his eyes urged her to continue. She touched the altar, and a vision flashed through her mind, a woman, her face like Leela's but older, standing in this same chamber, her own mark glowing as she spoke words Leela couldn't hear. The vision faded, leaving Leela gasping, her hand pressed to the altar's cold surface. "She was here," Leela whispered, not knowing how she knew. The Apache nodded. "Your blood remembers," he said. "The mark carries eye to the memory, the debt." Leela's knees weakened, and she sank to the ground, the obsidian slipping from her fingers. The mark burned, not with pain but with clarity, as if it were speaking to her, telling her she belonged here. The Apache knelt beside her, his voice soft but firm. "You can refuse it," he said, "but it will find you again. It always does." Leela's eyes filled with tears, not from fear but from the weight of understanding. The mark wasn't just a curse, it was a call, a connection to something greater than herself. She didn't know what it demanded, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. The chamber seemed to shift, the walls closing in as the mark's glow intensified, bathing the altar in eerie light. Leela stood, her resolve hardening, and traced the symbols on the altar with her fingers. Each touch sent a jolt through her, fragments of memories that weren't hers, so flashes of deserts, fires, faces she didn't know but felt tied to. The Apache watched, his silence a steady presence, and she realized he wasn't here to force her but to guide her, a keeper of secrets older than the canyon itself. She picked up the obsidian, its edge catching the light, and felt a pull, as if the altar were calling her to act. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. The Apache pointed to a small indentation in the altar, shaped like the mark. "Give it what it asks," he said. Leela hesitated, then pressed the obsidian into the indentation. The chamber rumbled, a low growl that shook the ground, and the mark on her thigh flared, a searing heat that made her cry out. The altar glowed, its symbols pulsing in time with her mark, and the air grew thick, heavy with the scent of rain and something ancient. A voice, not the Apache's, but deeper, resonant, filled the chamber, speaking in a language Leela didn't know but understood. It told of a pact, a promise made by her ancestors to protect the land, to guard its secrets from those who would exploit it. The mark was their vow, passed through blood, and Leela was its bearer now. She staggered back, overwhelmed, but the Apache caught her arm, his grip firm. "You're strong enough," he said, his voice cutting through the voice in her head. "You always were." Leela's chest heaved as she fought to process it all, of the weight of centuries, the responsibility she hadn't asked for. The mark cooled, its glow fading, and the chamber grew still. She looked at the Apache, his eyes reflecting the altar's light, and knew he'd carried his own burdens, his own marks. "What now?" she asked. He smiled. "A rare, fleeting thing. Now, you choose." The cave seemed to breathe as Leela stood before the altar, the obsidian still embedded in its surface, the symbols now dim but alive with quiet energy. She felt different, as if the mark had woven itself deeper into her, not just on her skin but in her soul. The Apache sat cross-legged, watching her with a patience that felt eternal, and she realized he wasn't just a guide, he was a witness, someone who'd seen others face this moment. The voice in the chamber had faded, but its words lingered, a call to protect, to honor the land that had shaped her ancestors. Leela's mind flashed to the settlement, to the greed that had driven her, the other miners tearing at the earth, the settlers ignoring the old stories, the warnings. The mark had set her apart, made her a target, but now she saw it as a shield, a purpose. She turned to the Apache, her voice steady. "If I accept this, what happens?" He tilted his head, considering her. "You become the land's voice," he said. "You carry its strength, its pain. It's not easy, but it's yours." Leela's fingers brushed the mark, no longer burning but warm, like a friend. She thought of her life before, running, hiding, fearing the mark, and knew she couldn't go back. The desert had called her, the Apache had found her, and the mark had chosen her. She nodded, a silent vow, and the chamber seemed to sigh, the air lighter, the walls less oppressive. The Apache rose, gesturing to the cave's mouth, where dawn's first light crept in, painting the rocks gold. "The land will show you," he said, and stepped aside, letting her lead. Leela walked toward the light, the obsidian in her hand, the mark a quiet pulse. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The desert greeted her as she emerged, its vastness no longer a threat but a home. The Apache followed, his presence a steady anchor, but Leela felt the shift within her. She was no longer the hunted, the lost. The mark glowed faintly, a reminder of the pact she'd accepted, a connection to the earth that thrummed beneath her feet. She saw the canyon differently now, its rocks and shadows alive with stories, with power. The Apache stopped, his eyes on the horizon, where the storm clouds had parted, revealing a sky streaked with pink and gold. "You'll know when it calls," he said, his voice soft but certain. Leela nodded, understanding that this was only the beginning. The mark was her guide, her burden, her strength. She thought of the settlers, of the miners, and knew she'd face them, not with fear but with the land's authority. The Apache turned, his form blending with the desert's haze, and she realized he was leaving. "Will I see you again?" she called, her voice echoing. He paused, his back to her, and said, "If the land wills it." Then he was gone, a shadow swallowed by the canyon. Leela stood alone, but not lonely, the mark a quiet hum, the obsidian heavy in her hand. She walked forward, her steps sure, the desert stretching before her like a promise. She didn't know what challenges awaited, but she knew she was ready. The mark had chosen her, and she had chosen it, a bond forged in the heart of the earth, unbreakable and eternal.